Hello, and thank you for joining us today for EarthEcho's STEMExplore Virtual Career Connection featuring Nia Morales, social scientist and human dimension specialist at Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission in Gainesville, Florida. My name is Casey. I'm a programs manager here at EarthEcho International, and we are so excited to have students from all over the globe joining us as we learn about exciting and sustainable careers in science, technology, engineering, and math. This live event is part of STEMExplore, EarthEcho's program that brings inspiration to life by telling the stories of dynamic female professionals in STEM careers during live virtual career connections. We would like to recognize and thank our founding sponsor, United Technologies, for their support of women in STEM and for their support of this program. Here at EarthEcho, we believe that youth have the power to change the planet. Visit www.earthecho.org to learn more about our programs. You can also access resources like STEMExplore's career profile videos, as well as tune in for upcoming live events just like this one. Now, I'd like to recognize and thank STEMExplore's after-school partner sites across the country, and I especially want to recognize those who are joining us live today. Now, we do have two sites in West Palm, Florida that are joining us, both with primetime Palm Beach County. Hello, Coleman Park. It's wonderful to see you. And across town, we have our friends at Green Acres. Hello, Green Acres. We're so excited that you could join us today. Now, also, we want to give a warm welcome to those who are joining on our live streams. And just a reminder that you can send in questions for our STEM expert via chat, and we will break throughout today's presentation to see if you have any questions. Feel free to start typing questions in the chat space on YouTube or on the Zoom feed, and we'll be sure to answer those as we go along. So let's get started. I want to welcome our special guest and EarthEcho's STEMExplore Mentor for today, Nia Morales. Good afternoon, Nia.
Hello, everybody.
Wonderful to see you. Now, Nia Morales is a social scientist with the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission. She leads the Center for Conservation Social Science Research, which consists of a group of researchers who design studies to better understand how humans interact with their environment. Nia got her PhD in human dimensions from the Wildlife Ecology and Conservation Department at the University of Florida, where she conducted her dissertation research on understanding the barriers and opportunities to minorities pursuing conservation careers. She also has a master's degree in environmental education from Florida Atlantic University and a bachelor's degree in wildlife ecology and conservation from the University of Florida. In her spare time, Nia is an avid equestrian and competes in horse shows. She has lots of pets, 2 cats, 2 dogs, 1 horse, and a bunch of fish, and loves to travel with her husband, Carlos, and enjoys all kinds of outdoor recreation from fishing and scuba diving to hiking and camping. So Nia, why don't you go ahead and tell us a little bit more about what it is that you do?
Sure, thanks, Casey. So as you mentioned, I run the Social Science Center here at Florida Fish and Wildlife. And as part of that job, I talk to a lot of stakeholders and public members. I help to design surveys and different studies to understand how people use Florida's natural resources and how we as managers of those natural resources can use that social data to help us conserve and protect species in Florida. So I also do quite a bit of public outreach, which includes working with public groups, youth groups. I help the Florida FYCCN, which is the Florida Youth Conservation Networks, with their program evaluation. So they do lots of camps and recreational programs, and I help them to evaluate them, which basically just means to assess how successful they were.
Excellent. Can you tell us what a typical day might look like for you?
Sure. I am at the computer most of the time, so it may not be as glamorous as some other jobs. I answer a lot of telephone calls and I do a lot of emails back and forth with different people, but I also have a lot of meetings where I help different biologists and folks that work at FWC to design projects that'll allow them to learn more about how humans interact with the environment. And then on top of that, sometimes I do get to leave my office and I go to public meetings and workshops and that sort of thing to talk about the type of science that we do.
Awesome. So Nia, you've spoken to a little bit about what you do in the fact that you look at how humans interact with their environment. So could you maybe give us a specific example, maybe like a case study that you've done before?
Sure. So there's a couple projects that we've done pretty recently. One of them is on a lake called Lake Istapoga, which is a lake that's in Sebring, Florida, which is kind of central South Florida. And we did surveys where we mailed a survey booklet to people who lived on the lake because we wanted to know how they interacted with the lake, what they thought about the way that FWC and other agencies manage the lake. So people fish there, people hunt there, people like to just go boating. But we didn't really understand all of the different things that folks did on that lake, and specifically how residents felt about the lake. And then another recent study that I did was to help understand whether or not people were aware of and satisfied with a brand new regulation that we put together for a fish called largemouth bass. So largemouth bass is a very popular fishing fish, and anglers come from all over the world to come and fish for it. And we recently changed the regulation. So we wanted to understand how many people knew about it and whether or not they thought the regulation was working.
Interesting. So where was this lake located?
So Lake Istapoga is in Sebring, Florida. So just south of Orlando, about an hour south of Orlando, kind of going towards the West Coast.
Okay, okay. So was there anything that came out of this particular case study, say, let's start with the lake, that was surprising or that really kind of spoke to you and made any changes?
Sure. So this lake has a long history of residents and anglers there being a little bit mad at FWC because FWC has to spray plants with herbicide to control them. And so sometimes people don't understand what types of chemicals we use and why we use them. So one of the goals of that survey was to see what people thought about that spraying that we did. And so what we learned was that people didn't really understand the science behind the types of materials we were using. So they thought that we were going out and spraying like Roundup, like the type of spray that you might use on your own plants at your house. And they didn't really quite understand how we were using them and how it benefited the lake. So we learned that we had to do a lot better communication with people who lived around the lake.
How interesting. So did you, when speaking about the communication, did you change signage? Did you send out flyers? What were the follow-ups? What were the conclusions from that? And then what actions were taken?
That's a good question. So we're actually in the middle of that process now.
Oh.
We have a big stakeholder engagement process where we have invited folks who live around the lake and folks who fish and do things on the lake to come and help us design a management plan where they have input and FWC has input. So we wanted to make it more of a collaborative partnership so that we can make sure that they get what they want and we're able to do what we need to do as well.
How interesting. Now, was there anything, talking about the other study that you mentioned with the largemouth bass, was there anything that came about that was surprising or any big take-home messages from that one?
Sure. The first year that we did the assessment, only half of the people knew that the regulation even existed. So we learned that we also had to do a lot of communication and outreach about it. And largemouth bass, people don't typically eat them. And the regulation allows you to eat some of them now. And so it's kind of trying to change people's mindset about what to do with fish when they catch them.
Wow, how interesting. And again, are you just implementing your findings and trying to improve that communication?
So that's part of a 10-year evaluation project, and we're on year two now. So it's a long-term thing, and we're going to see how people respond over time.
Wow, that's really incredible. That is super interesting, these different studies and how those work and how you're looking, how these communities in particular interact with their environment, but also Are they aware of certain things going on in their environment? That is really, really amazing. So what are some realities that we can come away from this? And I know that we'll talk about environmental sciences kind of as a broader topic. So what are some realities? For example, how much could, say, a student expect to make if they go into one of these careers?
That's another good question. So social science is pretty new in government agencies. There's a few federal agencies. So we're a state agency, so we're controlled by state government, but there are federal agencies like U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, Environmental Protection Agency, and they typically will pay a little bit more than we do, or a lot of it more. So social scientists typically require a master's degree. And then after that, you can expect to make around $45,000. And if you work for the federal agencies, you can probably make into the 60s up to the 80s.
Wow. Well, that is definitely not bad money. And of course, when you're talking about salaries, it's always relevant, right? Of where you do live. But I know I'm here in Florida along with you, and that is pretty good pay for somebody starting out. But then of course you have to think a little bit about the education that goes into that. And you said that social scientists typically have a master's degree?
Yeah, so now it's more common to have a master's degree. I have a PhD, and some of the folks who work for me also have PhDs, because there weren't a lot of programs a few years ago that had bachelor's or master's degrees in this. So there are a lot of us doctors floating around that do this, and now there's starting to grow more master's students who have this.
How interesting. And do you find, do many people in this field, do they also have psychology as part of their degrees or part of their study at all?
It's a very wide open field. So social science is a pretty broad field, but we focus on conservation. So I find that a lot of people who come into this field started off, like me, in wildlife ecology or biology, and decided that they were more interested in learning about the humans than the animals. But I do see a few people who started off maybe in psychology or other sort of fields that relate to people's behaviors and brains, for lack of a better term, that then get interested in how to use behavior and psychology in conservation. But I think it's probably more folks like me who come in from the biological side.
Interesting. So are there any good places, are there any good resources where students might be able to search what types of careers are available in this field?
Yes. So if you're interested in federal jobs, there's the usajobs.gov, which shows jobs in all federal agencies. And then oddly enough, Texas A&M, which is a university in Texas, keeps a very comprehensive job board of all kinds of wildlife and ecology related careers. So not just social science, but biologists and environmental scientists and that sort of thing. And then also, if you're interested in jobs in Florida, there's the People First system, which basically keeps track of all the jobs that are open in Florida's government.
Oh, interesting. And Texas A&M, do they typically list, well, I'm seeing the screenshot right now, they typically list national job openings?
Yes, they keep a list of jobs across the US and some international jobs as well. And they also keep a list of things like internships. So you can find internships all the way up to faculty or professor type jobs.
How interesting. That's very interesting that Texas A&M is a good resource for this. So anybody out there tuning in, if you want to work in environmental sciences, Texas A&M's job site is a pretty good place to go. But these are great resources. Thank you for sharing those. So now I think it's a really good time to pause for some questions coming in from our chat space, as well as from our interactive sites that we have that have logged in. And I'm going to ask one question that came in from our chat space fairly early on. And it was back when we were talking about kind of what does your typical day look like. And one of these viewers wanted to know, is every day different for you?
I would say most days, maybe 3 days out of 5 days are spent in front of the computer, but the other 2 days could be spent going to meetings. But I will say that what I deal with is different every day. So I may not be answering questions or doing emails or getting phone calls on the same topic every day. So I work on probably 10 to 15 different projects at any given time. So even though I may be sitting in the same place and answering the same phone call, I'm talking about very different things throughout the day.
Interesting. That's great. That was a great question. So let's head over to Green Acres in West Palm, Florida. Green Acres, what questions do you have for Nia?
What do you most enjoy about your job?
That's a good one. What do you most enjoy about your job?
So like I mentioned a couple of seconds ago that I probably have about 10 to 15 projects going at any given time. I'm never doing the same thing. And I get to learn about lots of different systems. I never knew anything about largemouth bass or fishing or any of that stuff before I started working with here, or lake management or any of that stuff. So every time I start a new project, I get to learn about a new natural resource, which is really cool.
And are you from Florida, Nia?
No, I was actually born in Massachusetts.
Okay, I know we're going to get to that, but I always wonder because I myself am what we call a transplant. I was born and raised in North Dakota, and I especially think working and living in Florida, discovering new environments, because Florida is such a big state and it's so incredibly diverse. It's a really cool place to be in environmental sciences. Great question. Green Acres, do we have another question?
No, not anymore.
You're good? Okay, sounds good. All right, ladies, we will come back to you. So glad you could join us. Now, we do have another question coming in from our chat space. We actually have two. So one of them is, what is the best, the top, the all-time best part of your job?
Oh man, these are tough questions. That I'm the boss. So this center that I currently run is brand new, and so I just got a big promotion since March. And so I think the coolest thing is that my agency thought that I was doing a good job, and they had enough faith in what I did and thinking it was important that they decided to give me this responsibility. And I think that's super cool that, you know, I was able to help people understand how important social science is.
Absolutely. That's great. And another question coming in from our chat. Do you have any extensive training in communications?
That's a really good question. And so my master's degree is in environmental education, which is different than communications. So my ability to communicate and design brochures and stuff like that is pretty limited. So I don't have any experience with graphic design or anything like that, but I do have experience with education. So when it comes to the outreach part of my scientific studies, I at least understand that people learn different ways and that you need to present your material in different ways depending on your audience. So I rely on my EE background pretty heavily, but I would love to have people who had communications backgrounds working with us as well.
Great. Awesome. We'll keep those questions coming in from the chat space, and Green Acres, write down or hold those questions that you're thinking of, because we will break again. So Nia, can you tell us a little bit more maybe about how you got to where you are today? So let's kind of start of what was your childhood like and where you grew up?
Yep. So like I mentioned before, I was born in Massachusetts, but I kind of bounced around a little bit. My family is not an outdoor savvy family. And I was the only one who was interested in natural resources and nature and animals. I used to, you know, run around in the backyard and pick stuff up, and my mom would go, put that away. And because of that, you know, we didn't go camping, we didn't go fishing. We went hiking a couple times, but it wasn't a big part of our life. So what I did was I watched a lot of Saturday morning TV. And so I don't think this is the case anymore, but when I was growing up on Saturday morning, starting around 8 a.m. till about noon, there were a whole bunch of TV shows that would come on. And some of them were nature shows. And those nature shows were really what got me interested in conservation. So things like Crocodile Hunter, Jeff Corwin's shows, Jack Hanna's Animal Adventures. So all of those things were what inspired me. So it wasn't really an experience, it was more watching things on TV.
Awesome. I definitely relate to that. I was also one of those kids who lived for Saturday morning programs, and definitely remember Jack Hanna show and all those nature programs growing up. And did you also participate in any after school programs as well?
Yes, lots of them. So I was what you might call a latchkey kid, which is probably a term people don't use anymore. But my parents were not together for most of my life. So I lived with my mom quite a bit. My sister and I lived with my mom. And so she worked long hours. And so oftentimes we either came home and we just kind of did our own thing, or we would go to aftercare programs where we, played games and learned stuff and hung out until my mom got off of work.
That's awesome. And yep, I can definitely relate to that as well. I was also in a single parent family, and latchkey kid was definitely the term back in the day. So can you tell us a little bit more about your educational journey that you've gone through?
Sure. I've been in school forever. Not everybody needs to go all the way through PhD. I think that's something like 24 years of school. But I did. So I got my undergraduate degree at the University of Florida, but I first got an associate's degree, which is a 2-year degree at Santa Fe College. And then I used that to transfer to University of Florida. I spent 1 year, my freshman year was at a place called Skidmore College in New York, but I didn't really like the school that much. So then I transferred to Santa Fe, finished my associate's, got my bachelor's degree. And then, like I mentioned before, I have a master's degree in environmental education from FAU. And while I was there, I worked at Pine Jog Environmental Education Center in West Palm. So some of you might be familiar with that place. And then I came back to Gainesville and I got my PhD in human dimensions of wildlife from the University of Florida. So I bounced around a little bit, but mostly in Florida.
Great. And as you were going through your schooling, did you know that this was kind of the career path you wanted to take?
Not at all. So when I was, even when I was in high school, the only jobs in conservation I'd ever heard of were a marine biologist, a park ranger, a zookeeper, stuff like that. So I really didn't know what was out there. And when I transferred to University of Florida, I started working at this place called Morningside Nature Center. And that was my first exposure to environmental education. I thought that I was going to be a wildlife biologist. And so I took a few field courses where they take you out and you have to actually go sampling and like pull critters out of the ground and run around in the woods and stuff. And it didn't work out well for me. So I realized that I was better suited to talking to people and sharing my love for the environment and conservation with people, so that we could encourage future generations to care about the environment. So that's how I got interested in EE. And then after Pine Jog, I came back to Gainesville and worked for a little bit. I was a science teacher for a little bit, and I still wasn't sure what I wanted to do. And I ended up talking to my future advisor at the University of Florida about getting a PhD. And she suggested that I go look into finding a fellowship or scholarship, because I definitely didn't have the money to support myself through another degree. So I got a fellowship that's designed for minorities who are underrepresented in their field. And there's really not a lot of Hispanic or Black or Asian people who work in conservation. So I was able to get a scholarship for that. And then that's kind of, after that, that's what led me to FWC.
Excellent. Very interesting journey. And I know there's lots of people on our chat space who are interested to find out, what exactly triggered you to go into this field of pairing that human behavior with the environment. And I think this is just such a cool career to look at. And like you said, it is a fairly new field, correct?
Yep. Yeah. And I mean, I guess the important thing is just, I didn't know what I wanted to be when I grew up, even when I was a grown-up. I knew that I liked nature and I liked conservation and that I was a good teacher. And so I used kind of all of those skills to figure out and look for opportunities that ended up being where I am today.
And I think that's a pretty important take-home message, that I know there's a lot of pressure out there for students to know what major they're going to go into, know what college they're going to go into, and what career they want to take, what career path they want to take. And believe me, the journey still continues. And so I think that's really good advice, that you never have to have your decisions final. And I think that's really good.
Yeah.
So Nia, here at EarthEcho, we believe that we can act now for a sustainable future. So can you expand a little bit more about how your job, your career supports and contributes to a sustainable future?
Yeah, so humans are pretty much I would say, the cause of most of our environmental issues across the world. So what I do is I help to understand how humans interact with nature. And I think understanding how humans interact with nature and how they decide to do the things they do is important, because we can use that information to help sustain and conserve fish and wildlife populations. So understanding what people think about different natural resources, or if they even understand that there's a fishing regulation that's designed to help protect fish. We in FWC make all kinds of rules and do lots of different management, but if people don't know what we're doing or don't understand how what we're doing helps the environment, then it's kind of difficult to make sure that it's sustainable long term. So I think using social science is really important in that way.
I agree. That is great. So now we're going to head to another round of questions. So we are going to hit our interactive site at Green Acres for questions, but I do have one question coming in from the chat. Could you explain the difference between a scholarship and a fellowship?
To be honest, I'm not really sure, but I can try and explain it this way. Sometimes a scholarship is a lump sum of money that they give you to support some endeavor. So for example, I got a $500 scholarship after high school that went towards my undergrad, but that was just a check. A fellowship is something that is a little bit more long-term, and they can vary how they give you money. So the fellowship paid my tuition and gave me a stipend, which is basically like a paycheck, but over the course of 4 years. And I got that money every semester for 4 years. In return for that, and I don't know if this is the one big factor, sometimes a fellowship will require you to do something afterwards. So as part of this fellowship, I am supposed to help mentor people who are trying to come into this field. And I have to prove to them that I have done continuing education, that I have participated in other activities that help bring people to that same fellowship program, if that makes sense. I think a fellowship just has a little bit more of a partnership than a scholarship. A scholarship gives you money because you achieve something, but a fellowship usually is a little bit more of a back and forth.
Okay, that's good. I hope that clarifies for our viewers. All right, let's head over to Green Acres in West Palm Beach, Florida. What questions do you have for Nia?
What's your favorite animal?
Good question. What's your favorite animal?
So I have to split that into domesticated and then wild. So my favorite domesticated animal is horses. My favorite wild animal, probably, oh man, it's not one single one. All of the cats.
All of the cats. I like that. Have you ever seen a Florida panther?
Never in the wild. I'm hoping that some biologists will take me out one day to go see them.
Yeah, that is definitely my bucket list here in Florida. Do you have a favorite plant?
I don't think I've ever thought about a favorite plant. I have plants that I like to eat. Anything with good fruit on it.
That's good. All right, Green Acres, do we have another question for Nia?
Yes, we joined the chat late, so we don't exactly know what her job is. What's your job?
Sure. Yeah, so I'm what's called a social scientist. So I do research that learns about people and how people interact with nature.
And I'm going to back up some of these slides here. And Nia, if you want to I think the case studies that you talked about, if you want to talk about the lake case study and kind of give them a quick overview of what that was and what you did and what you're working towards, I think that might help lay a little bit of groundwork.
Yeah, so a social scientist is basically, a biologist uses science. They collect data, they use the data to make decisions, right? So social science is very similar, but I study people. So one of the projects I mentioned earlier was that I did a survey of folks who lived near this lake in Sebring, Florida. And the survey was designed to find out how people use the lake, if they were satisfied or even knew about the ways that FWC helped to manage the lake. So we did a lot of spraying for plants to make sure that the invasive exotic plants were controlled and the native plants got to survive. But we found out through that study that people didn't really understand what we meant by spraying. So they thought that we were going out there and killing all the plants. And so they were very angry with FWC because they thought we were just destroying the habitat. So that study helped us to understand that we weren't doing a very good job of communicating how we were trying to conserve that lake. And we ended up designing a program where residents and anglers and hunters got to give input into how we developed a whole management plan for the lake. So that's kind of an example of the type of stuff that I do. So I do lots of surveys and stuff where I ask people about feedback about different topics.
And I know Green Acres, you all popped in right when we were kind of talking about what salary looks like. And so Nia did a quick overview of jobs with the Environmental Protection Agency. And this is just kind of a range. So if anybody's interested in environmental science, this is typically what a yearly salary could look like, depending on what kind of position that you would obtain. And then she also gave us, I think this is where you guys came in. She also gave us some really good resources. So if any of you are looking to get into environmental sciences, USA Jobs is a great source. People First is a great resource for Florida specifically. And then the Texas A&M job site, our job board, is a really great resource that posts everything nationally. And so you can even go on these and just see what's available just to even understand what kind of jobs are out there. Because when you look at this list, they're really varied and they're very different from one another. And so by kind of looking at what's out there, it helps you to figure out where you might want to go and what area of the study you might want to go in. And Nia, you did say Texas A&M, they even post volunteering and internship positions as well?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Great, that's cool. That's a great resource. All right, Green Acres, do you have another question?
No, we don't have any more questions.
Okay, great. I do have another question coming in from the chat, Nia. They want to know if you could do anything else besides what you already do for work, what would you do?
I would love to have somebody pay for me to travel all around the world.
That would be nice.
Yeah. I always figured that if somebody could pay me to be like a Jeff Corwin and go out and talk about animals across the world, that would be awesome.
Yes, absolutely. That would be a very, very good gig. Have you traveled a lot, either for work or for pleasure?
Yeah, both. So what's really neat about my job is that I do get to travel all over Florida. And I think Florida is interesting because, you know, I have been in Florida since middle school. So I've lived here for longer than a lot of people have lived here. And I remember when I graduated high school, the first thing I wanted to do was get the heck out of Florida because I thought it was boring. And apart from the beaches, it was hot and there was nothing else to do, nothing to see. But it wasn't until I started learning about all the different types of habitats and environment that Florida is very unique and we have some really cool things. And so now with my job, even though like I said, I'm in a lot of meetings and answering phone calls and stuff, occasionally when I'm starting a new project, I get to travel to learn about that resource. So I got to go to Lake Istapoga in Sebring, and they took me on an airboat and drove me all around the lake. So I've traveled all over Florida, which is super cool. And then on my personal time, I love to travel. So I think I've been to 26 states and 13 or 14 countries.
Wow, that's amazing. Any favorite spot that you've traveled to?
Well, I'm a little biased. So my family on my mom's side is from Costa Rica, and Costa Rica is probably one of the prettiest places ever. So that's my bias.
I would agree with you on that one. How about in Florida? Now, I know just because of living in Florida, and we hike and we camp and we travel all over the state. Do you have a favorite ecosystem that Florida offers?
I think the most unique are the springs. So if you've never been to any of the springs in north central Florida, they are really cool. There are these really deep, pure blue holes in the water that stay 72 degrees year round. I think those are probably the most unique thing that we have. And I think probably one of my favorite places that I've ever kayaked is on the Loxahatchee River, actually in West Palm Beach. Well, actually north of Palm Beach. But.
Nice. All right. I love it. I will agree with the springs. The springs are pretty amazing. Also, the Panhandle. The first time I ever went up to the Panhandle, I went west of Tallahassee, and I was floored that it looked so different, and it just seems so different. And Florida Cavern State Park is one of my favorite parks to go to and to camp.
That's on my bucket list. I haven't been there yet.
It's a good one. It's a really good one. All right, Green Acres, let's check in with you one last time. Do you have any other questions for Nia?
No, we don't have any questions.
You're good. All right. Well, thank you, Green Acres. It was wonderful to have you. And Nia Morales, of course, it was wonderful to have you as well. So everybody tuning in, you can stay in touch with Nia. You can follow along on the work that she is doing with FWC. And Nia was so nice to include her professional email there. So if you have any questions, you can definitely reach out to her. So thank you again, Nia. It was wonderful to have you. And it's always great to talk to a fellow Floridian and environmental scientist.
Great. Thanks very much for having me.
Absolutely. And of course, we want to thank all of our STEMExplore after school partner sites, especially Green Acres, who tuned in live today. And I also want to thank everyone who tuned into our live streams as well. So great questions, everyone. That was fantastic. I hope you've learned a little bit more about what Nia does, and I hope it sparked an interest for you. So EarthEcho has some exciting opportunities coming up. We will continue with STEMExplore Virtual Career Connections tonight. We will be talking with a scientist from the Jet Propulsion Laboratory in Pasadena, California. Now, we have several live events scheduled in the month of December, so be sure to visit www.earthecho.org to see our entire lineup and to register. And if you do register, you can chat in questions live with our live streams. And of course, we will have our STEMExplore after school partner sites joining us. Also, don't forget to stay tuned with EarthEcho on our social media channels, as well as that website that we've mentioned, earthecho.org. So thank you again to our wonderful STEMExplore mentor, Nia Morales, and to United Technologies for their tremendous support of our programming. On behalf of EarthEcho International, thank you for joining us, and keep exploring. Bye-bye, everyone.